There are moments in life when patience runs dry, and you realize that standing your ground is the only way to earn peace. For months, he had tried to avoid conflict, tried to keep things civil, tried to respect the boundaries of his own property and the rules that should have applied to everyone in his neighborhood. But one neighbor, who had somehow turned herself into the self-appointed ruler of the HOA, believed those rules didn't apply to her. She thought she could push people around, bark orders, and manipulate situations until everyone bent to her will. Her name, Karen, and she had a reputation. Everyone in the community whispered stories about her petty complaints, her endless HOA violation letters, and her obsession with controlling how people live their lives. But the story that finally broke the neighborhood's tolerance wasn't about lawn lengths or mailbox colors. It was about a treehouse. Not just any treehouse, though. This was a massive wooden structure she had ordered her workers to build directly over the fence line, half of it literally hanging into someone else's yard. And whose yard did she choose to intrude on? His. The quiet man who had kept to himself, paid his dues on time, never caused a fuss, and believed in letting people live freely. At first, he thought it was a mistake. Maybe the workers had misread the property line. Maybe they didn't realize how far the beams stretched. But when he confronted them, they shrugged and said, "Karen told us it's fine." And when he went directly to her, thinking reason might prevail, she smirked and said, "It's for my grandkids. Don't be selfish. You'll hardly notice." Hardly notice. The enormous structure towered over his fence, blocking sunlight in parts of his yard, throwing shade where his garden once thrived, and turning what had been a private space into a playground visible from every angle. He couldn't relax on his own patio without feeling like eyes were on him. He couldn't host family without someone pointing out the ridiculous wooden fortress looming over his fence. Still, he didn't want to escalate. He offered polite suggestions. Maybe she could move it a few feet. Maybe she could apply for a permit through the HOA. Maybe she could at least acknowledge the problem. But instead of compromise, Karen doubled down. She bragged to other neighbors that she had won, that she had put him in his place, and that the HOA would never side against her. That was the moment something inside him shifted. He realized she wasn't just inconsiderate. She was daring him to react. She wanted control, wanted dominance, wanted to remind him that she could do whatever she pleased. But what she didn't expect was his response. Because while she was busy lording over HOA meetings and making up rules for everyone else, he was quietly planning. He wasn't going to scream or argue or get dragged into her game. No, he was going to turn the tables in a way she never saw coming. And when the day came, when the treehouse was full of her grandkids playing loudly, when she was standing proudly on her side of the fence watching them, he walked into his yard, turned the handle of his sprinkler system, and unleashed a storm of cold water that blasted straight through the gaps and soaked the treehouse from top to bottom. The gasps, the shrieks, the stunned silence. Karen had never looked so powerless. This is the story of how one man finally stood up to the HOA Karen who thought she owned the world, and how a simple sprinkler system delivered the justice no HOA meeting ever could. Karen's reputation in the neighborhood had been building for years. She was the kind of neighbor who noticed everything, and not in a good way. If your grass grew an inch too high, she reported it. If your trash can stayed out a little too long after pickup, she wrote you up. If you painted your front door a color that wasn't in harmony with the rest of the street, she fought it. But the irony was that Karen never followed the rules herself. She parked her car wherever she wanted, ignored HOA notices about her own landscaping, and excused herself from fines by insisting she was on the board and therefore exempt. Most neighbors grumbled but didn't dare confront her. They knew arguing with Karen was like trying to wrestle a storm. You couldn't win, and you'd end up more exhausted than before. The man whose yard would soon become the target of her arrogance had avoided her for years. He believed in minding his own business. He worked hard, enjoyed tending to his small garden, and valued the peace of his backyard. But Karen couldn't leave him alone forever. The trouble began when her grandchildren started visiting more often. Karen decided they deserved a grand play structure. Instead of building it in her own yard properly, she had workers hammer beams directly into the fence line and extend the platform over into his property space. It wasn't just a small encroachment, it was blatant. When he first noticed, he approached the workers politely. They pointed to Karen's house and said, "She told us it's fine." That answer should have been a red flag, but he still believed Karen might have made an honest mistake. So he walked over and rang her doorbell. Karen appeared with her usual air of superiority. When he explained the issue, her response was dismissive. "Oh, come on," she said. "It's just a treehouse. It's for the kids. Don't be such a grump." He tried to reason with her. He explained property rights, mentioned permits, and pointed out the invasion of privacy. But Karen brushed him off every time. In her mind, the rules only applied when she was the one enforcing them. As weeks passed, the treehouse grew larger. The sound of hammers and drills filled the air. When it was complete, the structure loomed over his backyard like an unwanted tower. Children now peered down into his yard whenever they played. The garden he had spent years nurturing was shaded by the structure. His patio, once a sanctuary, felt exposed. Still, he didn't rush to anger. He contacted the HOA, only to find out Karen had already convinced the board it was grandfathered in. They wouldn't intervene. He considered legal action but realized it could take years and cost a fortune. That was when his mindset shifted. If the system wouldn't hold Karen accountable, maybe nature would. He began studying his own yard carefully. One thing Karen had overlooked in her arrogance was the sprinkler system. The way his sprinklers were positioned, water sprayed directly upward and outward, perfectly angled to soak the fence line. And now, with the treehouse hanging over that fence, the water arced right through the cracks in the wood. The idea formed almost by accident, but once it struck him, he couldn't let it go. He decided he wouldn't argue, wouldn't fight, wouldn't waste another minute in HOA meetings. Instead, he would simply wait for the perfect moment. That moment came sooner than expected. One weekend, Karen hosted a family gathering. Her grandchildren filled the treehouse, laughing and shouting. Karen stood proudly in her yard, chatting with other adults about how amazing the playhouse was. She even bragged that no one could stop her because the HOA is on my side. From his yard, he heard every word. And that's when he walked over to the control box. He took a deep breath, turned the dial, and let the sprinklers roar to life. Water gushed upward, blasting the wooden beams, spraying directly through the gaps, and drenching the inside of the treehouse. The children screamed in surprise, scrambling down. Karen's confident smile melted into outrage as her perfect structure turned into a dripping mess. She ran to the fence, yelling, "Turn it off! You're ruining everything!" But he simply stood calmly, arms crossed, watching. For once, Karen wasn't in control. The sprinklers soaked the treehouse for minutes before he finally turned them off. By then, the wood was dripping, the kids were miserable, and Karen was speechless. Word spread quickly. Neighbors who had suffered under Karen's reign of pettiness couldn't help but laugh. Some even congratulated him quietly. The incident became the talk of the neighborhood, proof that Karen wasn't untouchable after all. Of course, Karen tried to retaliate. She complained to the HOA, claiming he had harassed her grandchildren. But when others pointed out that her structure illegally crossed the property line, her complaint fizzled. She didn't want to draw attention to her own violation. From then on, the treehouse was rarely used. Karen seemed embarrassed, her arrogance deflated, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt a little freer. The man didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He had made his point without shouting, without lawsuits, without endless battles. One twist of a sprinkler handle had done what years of HOA complaints never could.